Hey, Ledger Baptist. I'm glad to be here again this week to do the weekly recap video for you. We're in week 14. If anybody is interested in doing one of the weekly video recaps, just shoot Brock an email and he can set you up for a week in the future. This past week we read the end of Joshua, 12 to 24, and we moved into Judges, chapters 1 to 7. Joshua is broken up into two parts. The conquests is the first section of Joshua, and then the second section is the establishment of the inheritance. Israel is moving into the promised land, and they are taking the land that God provided for them. From my Bible, it said roughly, the conquest was probably roughly around 7 years. So now it's time, as we were reading, for the Israelites to take the promised land. And just as a side note, just keep in mind that a lot of the infrastructure was already set up for the Israelites as they were moving into these lands. So there was a lot of things that were there that they didn't have to work for. I mean, God was really blessing them with this place. They have now a long history of God showing up for them and fulfilling his promises, right? Pulling them out of slavery, fulfilling the promises that he had given to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And we saw that in chapter 13, the list of kings that were defeated, right? So God tells them he will be with them, that as long as they trust him, which there's some ups and downs along the way, but as long as they trust him, he will keep his word, and he will carry out his promises. We see that God fulfills his promise to Caleb in this section. The land allotments are made. The tabernacle is set up in Shiloh, and people began to settle in their places. As we know, the Israelites are a stubborn people, and they don't do what they're supposed to do, right? So they don't push all the people out, and they don't move out into all the land that God had given them. And they allow some of these sinful people and this sinful culture to still surround them, which caused a lot of problems for them in the future. In this section of Joshua, we see that the Levites are given towns. We know that they are not given an inheritance of land, but they are given an inheritance of God. So they are the spiritual leaders, and they are dispersed in towns around the promised land to act as the spiritual leaders for the Israelites, to remind them of God's word and God's law and the covenants that were made to the Israelites from God. The sanctuary cities are established as a form of justice. Joshua gives his final words to the Israelites. He reminds them that they need to choose what God they will serve, and that they have to remember the law and the covenants that God had established with them. Israel was ultimately God's plan for evangelism in the world, and God was going to test them in Judges to see if they would obey him. So we see at the end of Joshua that Joshua passes. The Israelites say, yeah, we're going to follow you. We're going to keep the promises. We're going to obey. We will follow the laws that God has established for us. But very quickly, as we see in the beginning of Judges, they don't obey what God had told them to do, and it causes a lot of problems for them. They end up being oppressed by various groups of Canaanites, and they fall into this pattern of sin, which is what we see in the book of Judges. The book of Judges is a very difficult book, very bloody, a lot of war, a lot of problems with humanity. And we see this cycle where the Israelites sin, they're punished, there's consequences for their sin, they cry out to God, and God delivers them. He provides a judge who is filled with the Spirit and delivers them from the people group that is oppressing them in various ways, as you will see through the first, I think in the first 7 chapters, it covers 5 of the judges that are part of leadership in Israel. And what was interesting, I thought that I was reading that, not like we think of judges as a judge with a gavel, sort of like in a courtroom or something like that, but judges had a lot more authority than that in the Israelite culture. They would have been the ones that were kind of reminding the Israelites of the covenant, and then they would have also been civil and military leaders in that time. So Judges it shows us that even God can use anyone to fulfill his plan, right? God had a plan. He made a promise. He was going to fulfill that promise. In this section of the Bible, we see some very, very faulty leadership and problems with people, but God still uses those people to fulfill his plan. We see a lot less victories. We just see a lot of like difficult times. Generations are dying. New generations are coming up. There's a lot of evil people. People are doing what they want to do in the eyes of whatever they see as right and fit. And it's causing a lot of problems for the Israelites that we will continue as we go through the book of Judges. We will continue to see how Israel's bad choices create a lot of problems for them, and how God has to kind of keep coming in and rescuing them. But ultimately, we can relate to a lot to this story of the Israelites in this section, as we have through the history of the Israelites. We can get in the same pattern, and in this case, you can see that it's sort of setting up the need for Israel to have a king. And ultimately, the long story, right, is that king is Jesus. Their desire is really for Jesus to rule their life. And in that way, we can relate to that too, because we also, we need a king in our life. We need Jesus to remind us and to establish a relationship with us, and to challenge us, right, and to help us remember, who he is and why he came to save us, and why we need him in our lives. So I hope you guys enjoy the weekly readings. I hope you have a good rest of your week, and I'll see you on Sunday at 9.